Picture yourself stepping through a veil of time, back into the heart of Victorian London, where winter arrived not as a gentle visitor, but as an unrelenting presence that settled into every corner of the city. Have you ever wondered what it truly felt like to endure those infamous London winters, when the very air seemed thick with smoke and suffering? What would it have been like to wake each morning knowing that warmth was a luxury, and that the fog outside your window might be the last thing you'd see clearly all day? Tonight we're going to drift slowly through the frost-kissed streets of the 1840s, where every breath formed clouds in the bitter air, where survival itself required a quiet kind of courage that most of us can barely imagine. If this kind of gentle storytelling helps you find peace and rest, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it truly brings you comfort. And perhaps, let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is in your corner of the world. There's something deeply soothing about knowing how many of us are settling into sleep together, each from our own distant places, united by these whispered stories from long ago. Now, dim the lights around you, maybe switch on a gentle fan for that soft, constant hum that helps ease the mind. And let us settle in for tonight's quiet journey through the cobbled streets and smoky alleys of Victorian London, where winter was not just a season, but a way of life. The rhythm of their days begins before dawn. Imagine yourself stirring awake in a narrow room somewhere off the Whitechapel Road. It is January in the year 1847, and the first sensation that greets you is not the gentle touch of morning light, but the sharp bite of cold air against your face. The window beside your makeshift bed, if you can call it a bed, is frost clinging to its cracked glass like delicate white lace, though most of the pane has long since given way to the persistent London wind. You pull your threadbare wool coat tighter around your shoulders, the same coat that serves as both clothing and blanket, and breathe in the distinctive scent of winter in this great, sprawling city. It's a mixture that would be alien to our modern senses. Coal smoke thick and acrid, the dampness of stone and wood that never quite dries the lingering essence of boiled cabbage from a neighbor's evening meal, and underneath it all the sweet, earthy smell of straw that has been slept on by too many bodies for too many nights. Your feet touch the floor, rough wooden planks that seem to drink in the cold and hold it there, waiting to shock you awake with each step. The boards creak softly under your weight, a sound that has become as familiar as your own breathing. Through the thin walls, you can hear the gentle stirring of others beginning their day. A cough here, it's the rustle of fabric there. Someone striking flint in a desperate attempt to coax life from yesterday's cold ashes. The rhythm of their days demanded movement. Always movement. You are, perhaps, a laundress in these winter months, or maybe you spend your days sweeping chimneys, or standing on street corners hoping someone will buy the matches you've wrapped in small paper bundles. Whatever your trade, winter has made it infinitely harder, infinitely more painful, infinitely more uncertain. Your hands, as you examine them in the pale light filtering through that broken window, tell the story of these cold months. Fingers swollen and red, knuckles cracked from constant exposure to icy water, or frozen stone fingernails blackened with soot that no amount of scrubbing seems to remove entirely. The clothing you wear, the same clothing you wore yesterday and the day before, and will wear tomorrow, consists of layers accumulated over time. Thin cotton shift against your skin, though it provides little warmth and less comfort. Over this, a wool dress that was once perhaps brown or gray, but has faded to that indeterminate color that seems to be the uniform of London's working poor. The wool is rough against your skin, patched in a dozen places with scraps of different fabrics, each patch telling its own small story of wear and mending and making do. Your outer coat, the one you clutched around yourself upon waking, hangs loose on your frame. Not because it was tailored that way, but because it belonged to someone larger, someone who no longer needed it, someone whose story you will never know. The sleeves are too long, the shoulders too broad, but it blocks some of the wind, and that is enough. Around your neck, a thin scarf, more holes than fabric now, but still capable of providing that crucial barrier between the bitter air and your skin. A quiet struggle repeated endlessly. Your shoes, your shoes tell perhaps the most eloquent story of all. Once they might have been leather, might have been brown or black, might have had proper soles and laces that stayed tied. Now they are held together with strings stuffed with newspaper and straw to fill the gaps where leather has worn away entirely. When you step outside into the morning air, you will feel the cold and wet seep through almost immediately, that slow, inexorable dampness that will stay with you until evening. When you return to this same small room to begin the process all over again, but first, you must venture out to fetch water. This simple task, one that we accomplish now with the turn of a handle, becomes in this January morning of 1847 a small expedition fraught with discomfort. You take up a wooden bucket, its bottom slightly warped from years of use, and step out into the London winter morning. The air hits you like a physical presence. It's not just cold, it's thick, laden with the smoke from thousands of chimneys that have been burning since long before dawn. Each breath you take feels heavy, coating your lungs with that distinctive taste of cold dust and fog that defines winter in this city. The fog itself seems to have substance, swirling around your ankles like a living thing, muffling the sounds of the awakening city and creating a world that exists only in arm's reach. Imagine yourself there, moving through that gray-wrapped world. The communal water pump stands at the end of your street, a cast-iron monument to necessity that serves perhaps 50 families in the surrounding tenements. As you approach, you can see the small queue that has already formed. Other figures wrapped in similar threadbare coats, breath visible in the cold air, feet shifting constantly in a futile attempt to generate warmth. The iron handle of the pump, when your turn finally comes, is so cold it burns your palm even through your thin gloves. You work the handle with steady, rhythmic pumps, and the water that eventually flows is so cold, it seems to carry winter itself in its very essence. The bucket, when filled, becomes an anchor of responsibility. Water is heavy, and in winter, every step back to your room becomes a careful negotiation with ice-slicked cobblestones in your own shivering hands. The water sloshes gently as you walk each small wave, a reminder of how precious. This resource is how carefully it must be rationed throughout the day for drinking. For the small washing, you might manage for the tea that will provide one of your few sources of internal warmth. Back in your room, you might attempt to build a fire if fuel can be found or afforded. Coal is expensive, wood scraps are jealously guarded, and so you have learned to make do with whatever combustible materials present themselves. Paper salvaged from the street's twigs, gathered from the few parks you're allowed to enter, sometimes even dried horse dung collected with resignation and necessity overcoming pride. The rhythm of their days moved to the pulse of survival. Your breakfast, if it can be called that, consists of whatever small mercy yesterday's earnings might have provided. Perhaps a heel of bread hard enough to require soaking in your precious water before it can be chewed. Maybe a small piece of bacon fat, saved and treasured, to provide a few moments of richness on your tongue and a brief feeling of satisfaction in your stomach. If fortune has smiled, there might be a withered apple, or a small piece of cheese, or even, on the rarest of days, a fresh roll purchased warm from a baker's shop. But more often, breakfast is simply the continuation of hunger from the night before. A familiar hollow feeling that has become such a constant companion, you almost forget it's there. You sip water slowly, trying to fool your stomach into feeling full, and perhaps chew on a small piece of raw turnip, if turnips can be found cheaply in the winter markets. The work that awaits you depends on what opportunities winter has left available. If you are a laundress, the work becomes a battle against the elements themselves. Your hands plunge again and again into water that is barely above freezing. Scrubbing garments with soap so harsh it leaves your skin raw and cracked. The wet clothes, when hung to dry, freeze stiff on the lines, creating strange sculptures of ice-hardened fabric that must be brought in and thawed before they can be properly dried by whatever fire you can maintain. If your trade is chimney sweeping, winter is both blessing and curse. There is more work, as wealthy houses burn their fires continuously, but the work itself becomes a torment of contradictions. You climb into chimneys that are both blazingly hot from recent fires and bitingly cold from winter air flowing down from above. The soot is thick and choking, and when you emerge, the contrast between the heat of the chimney and the cold of the winter air feels like a physical blow. Quiet struggle, repeated endlessly through the fog-wrapped streets. Perhaps you are one of London's countless street sellers, standing on corners with small wares displayed on makeshift trays. Matches are a common trade. Small bundles of wooden sticks topped with sulfur, each one representing a tiny hope for warmth in someone else's hearth. You stand for hours in the same spot, feet slowly going numb despite your constant shifting. Watching the endless parade of better-dressed figures hurry past through the fog. The cold creeps into your body gradually, starting with your fingers and toes, then spreading inward until even your thoughts seem sluggish and slow. You stamp your feet not in impatience, but in the desperate hope of maintaining circulation. You blow on your hands, though your breath provides only momentary relief before the cold reclaims them. You watch wealthier passersby in their thick coats and proper boots, noting how they move with purpose and speed, while you must remain stationary, a prisoner of your need to earn the few pence that might mean the difference between supper and hunger. The fog that surrounds you is not like any fog you might know today. This is London's particular creation, a marriage of nature and industry that transforms the city into something otherworldly. It's thick enough to taste, yellow-tinged from coal smoke, and so dense that buildings vanish just yards away. Street lamps burned continuously during these fog-bound days, creating small islands of amber light in an ocean of gray. The gas flames flicker and dance, their glow diffused and softened until they seem more like dreams of light than actual illumination. In the silence between footsteps, winter tells its stories. When evening approaches, though in the fog-wrapped days of winter, it's often difficult to tell when afternoon ends. And evening begins, you return to your small room, carrying whatever small victories the day has provided. Perhaps a few pence earned, perhaps a crust of bread given by someone moved to momentary kindness, perhaps nothing more than the simple achievement of having survived another day. The room you return to is no warmer than the one you left, but it offers the psychological comfort of enclosure, of walls that belong, however temporarily, to you. If fuel has been gathered or afforded, you might build a small fire in the grate, a precious luxury that transforms the room into something approaching comfort. The smoke from your fire joins the thousands of other plumes rising from chimneys across the city, adding your small contribution to the great cloud that hangs perpetually over London. Your evening meal, when there is one, consists of whatever can be prepared simply and eaten quickly before the cold reclaims it. A piece of bread toasted over your small fire, perhaps spread with a thin layer of dripping, the fat saved from cooking, solid now in the cold air. Maybe a boiled onion, if onions can be found cheaply, providing both warmth and the illusion of a substantial meal. Hot tea, when tea can be afforded, becomes not just a drink, but a small ceremony of warmth. The cup held in both hands to capture every possible degree of heat. The rhythm of their days required a particular kind of endurance. As you prepare for sleep, the rituals of staying warm begin again. Every piece of clothing you own becomes part of your bedding strategy. The coat that served you during the day now becomes an additional blanket. Your scarf, worn and thin though it may be, wraps around your neck and pulls up over your head. If you are fortunate enough to have extra stockings, they serve as makeshift mittens, pulled over hands that will otherwise ache with cold throughout the night. The bed itself, a straw mattress shared perhaps with others, covered with whatever blankets and covers have been accumulated over time, becomes a small fortress against the cold. You burrow into it like a small animal seeking hibernation, pulling every available layer up to your chin, tucking edges under your body to prevent the escape of whatever warmth your own body might generate. Sleep, when it comes, arrives in fits and starts. The cold wakes you periodically, forcing you to adjust your position to pull covers tighter, to search for a warm spot that has not yet been claimed by the ever-present chill. Around you, the city continues its winter song, the distant sound of wheels on cobblestones, the occasional call of a night watchman, the persistent coughing that echoes through thin walls from neighboring rooms, where others fight their own battles against the cold. In the deep hours before dawn, when the city holds its breath, sometimes, in those dark hours between midnight and morning, you might hear the sound of snow beginning to fall. It starts as the faintest whisper against your cracked window, a gentle tapping that gradually builds into the soft, steady rhythm of flakes accumulating on the sill. Snow in London is both blessing and curse. It muffles the harsh sounds of the city, creating a temporary quiet that feels it's almost sacred, but it also means that tomorrow's struggle will be even harder. The streets more treacherous, the cold more penetrating. You drift in and out of consciousness, your body's warmth and the cold air around you reaching a delicate equilibrium that allows for rest without comfort. In these half-sleeping moments, you might dream of warmth, of summer days that seem impossibly distant, of fires that never go out, of clothing that truly keeps the cold at bay. But even in dreams, the reality of your situation intrudes, and you find yourself pulling imaginary blankets tighter, seeking in sleep the comfort that waking life has made so rare. The hours pass slowly, marked not by clocks, for clocks are luxuries beyond your reach, but by the gradual changes in the quality of darkness outside your window. The shifting patterns of sound from the street below, the slow progression of your own body temperature as it rises and falls with your attempts to find rest. The rhythm of their days would begin again with dawn. When morning light begins to filter through the fog and through your broken window, painting everything in that peculiar gray-gold glow that belongs only to London winter mornings, you know that the cycle will begin again. Another day of cold, another day of making do, another day of the quiet endurance that defines life for so many in this great city during these bitter months. Your body aches as you prepare to rise not just from the cold, but from the mattress that provides support without comfort from the positions you've held throughout. The night in your search for warmth from the accumulated fatigue of living always on the edge of true comfort. But you rise anyway, because the day demands it. Because survival requires movement, because somewhere in the fog-wrapped streets below, opportunity might be waiting. A day's work, a kind word, a small mercy that makes the struggle worthwhile. The water in your bucket has developed a thin skin of ice overnight. You break it gently with your finger, watching the small shards float like tiny ships on the dark surface. This water will serve for washing, a quick splash on face and hands that shocks you fully awake, and for the tea that might begin your day if tea leaves can be found or afforded. A quiet struggle, repeated endlessly through the seasons, as you dress for another day. Layering the same garments in the same order that experience has taught you provides the best protection against the cold. You become part of a great, invisible army of Londoners, engaged in the same morning ritual. Across the city in rooms similar to yours in conditions that mirror your own, thousands of others are rising, dressing, preparing to face another day in a winter that seems to have no end. The sounds of the city beginning to wake drift up through your window. The clip-clop of horses' hooves on cobblestone, the rattle of cartwheels, the distant calls of early vendors beginning their rounds. Somewhere a church bell tolls the hour, its bronze voice carrying clearly through the cold air, marking time in a city, where time often seems to move differently in winter, more slowly, more deliberately. As if the cold itself has thickened the very air through which minutes and hours must pass. You gather what few possessions require gathering, the small knife that helps with your work, the bit of string that holds things together, the cloth bundle that contains whatever small treasures or necessities you have managed to accumulate. Everything you own in the world fits easily in your two hands of portability. Born not of choice but of circumstance, of a life lived always on the edge of having to move, having to find new shelter, having to begin again. Imagine yourself there, stepping into that world of endless gray. The door of your room opens onto a narrow hallway that smells of dampness and humanity, where the walls sweat with condensation that never quite freezes, but never quite dries. Other doors line this hallway, each one leading to a story similar to your own, each one housing someone engaged in the same daily battle against cold and want and the grinding difficulty of simply staying alive through a London winter. You make your way down stairs that are worn smooth by countless feet, past landings where small groups huddle, around shared fires, past windows that look out onto courtyards where laundry hangs frozen stiff on lines past doorways, where children play quiet games designed not to disturb the adults whose rest is so precious and so frequently interrupted by the demands of survival. The street, when you finally emerge onto it, presents itself as a theater of winter endurance. The cobblestones are slick with a mixture of frost and the previous day's slush, creating a surface that requires constant attention to navigate safely. The fog hangs so thick, you can barely see the building across the narrow street, and the gas lamps that should provide guidance burn with halos of diffused light that seem to illuminate nothing so much as the fog itself. The rhythm of their days played out on streets that never truly warmed. Around you, the great performance of London winter survival unfolds in 1,000 small acts. A woman hurries past, her shawl pulled tight around a baby whose face is barely visible among the wrapped fabric. A man pushes a small cart loaded with coal, the black chunks glittering with frost. He's calling out his wares in a voice made hoarse by cold and coal dust. Children dart between the adults, their games adapted to the confined spaces that winter allows. their laughter creating small clouds of vapor that dissipate quickly in the thick air. The smells of the street in winter create their own complex narrative. The sharp scent of coal smoke dominates everything, but underneath it, you catch the aroma of baking bread from a shop whose warmth. You cannot afford to enter the earthy smell of horses and the more pungent scent of their droppings, which freeze quickly in the cold and are gathered by those even more desperate than yourself to burn for fuel. If your work takes you to the docks, you will encounter the Thames in its winter costume, dark water that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it, sometimes crusted near the banks with ice that creaks and groans as it shifts with the tide. The great river carries the cold deep into the heart of the city, and standing near it, you can feel the way the wind off the water cuts through fabric and flesh with equal ease, a quiet struggle that demanded its own form of courage. The work itself, whatever form it takes, becomes a negotiation with winter. If you wash clothes, your hands must plunge repeatedly into water that is barely liquid, scrubbing with soap so harsh it strips away skin along with dirt. The wet garments freeze on the lines where you hang them, creating strange sculptures of fabric, and ice that must be beaten soft before they can be properly dried by whatever fire you can maintain. If you sweep chimneys, you climb into spaces that are simultaneously blazingly hot from recent fires and bitingly cold from winter air flowing down from above. The soot coats your skin, your clothes, your lungs, creating a second skin that provides no warmth but much discomfort. When you emerge from each chimney, the contrast between the residual heat of your workspace and the bitter air outside creates a shock that your body never quite learns to expect. If you sell matches or small wares on street corners, you become a statue of endurance, standing in the same spot for hours while the cold gradually claims your body inch by inch. You learn to shift your weight from foot to foot in a rhythm that keeps blood flowing to flex your fingers. Inside their inadequate coverings to keep your face mobile, so that when customers do approach, you can manage a smile that might encourage a purchase. The rhythm of their days move to winter's relentless pulse. Lunch, when it exists, might be a small piece of bread eaten while standing in a doorway that provides shelter from the wind. Or perhaps a hot potato purchased from a street vendor, held as much for its warmth as for its nourishment, the heat, seeping through the thin paper in which it's wrapped, and providing a few moments of genuine comfort for your cold hands. The afternoon stretches on with its own particular challenges. If you work indoors, the contrast between indoor and outdoor temperatures becomes a constant shock to your system. The warmth of a factory or workshop, heated by the machinery and the presence of many bodies, makes stepping outside feel like walking into a physical wall of cold. If you work outdoors, the afternoon sun, when it appears at all through the fog, provides only the illusion of warmth, a pale light that illuminates but does not heat. As the short winter day begins its early fade into evening, the city takes on a different character. The fog, if anything, grows thicker. Fed by the smoke from thousands of chimneys as families return home and attempt to warm their small spaces, the gas lamps begin to flicker to life, creating that characteristic London winter scene of small pools of light connected by vast stretches of gray uncertainty. In the gathering dusk, the city wrapped itself in smoke and shadow. Your return journey to your small room becomes an exercise in navigation and memory. The fog is so thick that familiar landmarks disappear, and you must rely on the sound of your footsteps on different surfaces, the particular scent of different neighborhoods, the feel of the wind as it channels between buildings to find your way home. Other figures move through the fog like ghosts, appearing suddenly and disappearing just as quickly, each one wrapped in their own struggle against the cold. The evening meal, when there is one, represents the day's small victory against want. Perhaps a few vegetables boiled together in the same pot you use for washing, creating a thin soup that provides both warmth and nourishment. Maybe a piece of bread toasted over your small fire and spread with whatever fat or preserves you have managed to acquire. The act of eating becomes a meditation on gratitude for whatever the day has provided, however meager it might seem. The rhythm of their days ended as it began, with the negotiation of cold. As you prepare once again for sleep, the rituals of warmth-seeking begin anew. Every garment must be deployed strategically, every blanket arranged for maximum effectiveness. You might warm stones near your small fire and wrap them in cloth to place near your feet, providing a small core of heat that will last for an hour or two into the night. You might exercise briefly in the confines of your small space. Gentle movements designed to increase circulation without exhausting your limited energy reserves. The sounds of the city settling into its winter night create a lullaby of sorts. The gradual decrease in street noise. The final calls of vendors, the sound of windows and doors closing as families retreat into whatever warmth they can create or maintain. Through your broken window, you might catch the soft whisper of snow beginning to fall, or the gentle moan of wind through the gaps in neighboring buildings. Sleep comes not as refreshment, but as escape. A temporary reprieve from the constant awareness of cold and want that defines these winter days. You close your eyes and let your body's exhaustion override the discomfort of your sleeping arrangements, knowing that in a few hours, the cycle will begin again. The cold awakening, the search for fuel and food, the work that barely provides enough to survive. The return to this same small room where winter waits patiently to test your endurance once more. The rhythm of their days, simple and unending, carved by winter's patient hand. In the deepest hours of night, when even the city seems to sleep, you might wake briefly to adjust your covers or to listen to the soft symphony of winter London. The distant sound of the Thames. Flowing dark and cold toward the sea, the occasional creak of buildings settling in the cold. The soft whisper of wind carrying smoke and fog through streets that never truly rest. And in those quiet moments wrapped in whatever warmth you have been able to create, you might reflect on the strange persistence of the human spirit. The way hope continues to flicker even in the coldest winters. The way tomorrow always arrives with its own. Small possibilities, even when today has offered so little comfort. The winter will end, eventually. Spring will return to London's streets, bringing with it warmth and longer days, and the possibility of easier survival. But for now, in these January nights of 1847, winter reigns supreme, shaping every breath, every step, every small decision that makes up the texture of daily life for London's countless working poor. Imagine yourself there, drifting into sleep with the sounds of winter London. As the sun fades behind the perpetual fog, let's shift our attention to another figure moving through these same winter streets. In the winter of 1849, a man walks slowly through the gaslit streets of London, his footsteps deliberate and unhurried, despite the bitter cold that sends most people scurrying quickly toward whatever warmth awaits them. This figure moves differently through the fog-wrapped city, not with the urgent purpose of someone seeking shelter, nor with the resigned trudging of those we met in our previous journey, but with the careful attention of someone who sees stories in every doorway, hears voices in every shadow. Henry Mayhew pauses at a street corner where a young girl, perhaps 12 years old, stands with a small basket of watercress wilting in the frost. Her fingers, visible beneath thin, torn gloves, are the color of winter itself, blue-white with cold, moving stiffly as she arranges and rearranges her small wares in a futile attempt to make them appear fresh and appealing. Mayhew approaches her not as a customer, but as something rarer in these streets, someone genuinely interested in her story. Imagine yourself there, observing this quiet encounter between observer and observed. "How long have you been standing here today?" Mayhew asks gently, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air. His voice is educated, kind, carrying the warmth of someone who has known comfort, but has chosen to seek out its absence. The girl looks up at him with the cautious expression of someone who has learned that attention from well-dressed strangers rarely brings good fortune. "Since dawn, sir," she replies, her voice small but clear, carrying that particular London accent that shapes words like clay in the mouth. "Though dawn's hard to tell in this fog, sir. When the streets started stirring, I suppose." Mayhew withdraws a small notebook from his coat pocket, a gesture that has become as natural to him as breathing. The notebook is bound in brown leather. Its pages already filled with hundreds of similar conversations. It's each one a small window into the vast, largely invisible world of London's working poor. He writes quickly but carefully, capturing not just her words but the way the cold has affected her speech, the way she shifts her weight from foot to foot in an endless dance of attempted warmth. The rhythm of his work moved to a different pulse, patience, attention, quiet compassion. Henry Mayhew was born into comfort in 1812, the son of a London solicitor, who expected his children to follow respectable paths into respectable professions. But Henry's curiosity had always pulled him toward the margins, toward the stories that polite society preferred not to examine too closely. By the 1840s, he had co-founded Punch magazine, that clever publication filled with satire and social commentary, but increasingly he found himself drawn away from the wit and wordplay of his more comfortable peers towards something deeper and more necessary. Winter in London revealed truths that other seasons kept hidden. In summer, poverty could disguise itself with lighter clothes and outdoor living. In spring and autumn, the city's poor could supplement their diets with occasional scavenging, with work that became available as weather improved. But winter stripped away all pretense, all buffer between survival and catastrophe. Winter made visible the true structure of London society, and Mayhew had appointed himself its gentle chronicler. On this particular evening, as he moves through the fog-thick streets near Covent Garden, Mayhew encounters a figure that will stay with him for years to come. An elderly man, bent nearly double with age and the weight of the sack he carries, makes his way slowly along the gutter, occasionally stopping to examine small objects that glint in the gaslight. This is one of London's mudlarks, scavengers who search the Thames shores and city gutters for anything that might be sold or used. In the silence between questions, stories emerge like frost on glass. "Good evening," Mayhew says, matching his pace to the old man's shuffle. "Might I ask what you're searching for on such a cold night?" The mudlark straightened slightly, his face emerging from the shadows cast by his ragged cap. His features tell the story of decades spent outdoors in all weather, skin weathered to the texture of old leather, eyes that water constantly from the cold, but remain alert and intelligent. When he speaks, his voice carries the accumulated hoarseness of too many winter mornings, too many years of breathing London's particular air. "Nails, sir, if they can be found. Bits of iron? Coal that's fallen from carts?" He gestures to his sack with hands that are more claw than finger now, joints swollen with arthritis and cold. "Not much trade in winter, sir, but the cold makes people careless. They drop things they might hold tighter in warmer weather." Mayhew writes carefully, noting not just the words, but the way the man's breath creates small clouds that dissipate quickly in the fog, the way he favors his left leg, the particular way he holds his head tilted, as if listening for sounds that might indicate dropped treasure or approaching danger. "How long have you been working these streets?" Mayhew asks, and the question opens a door into a life that spans decades of London winters. Each one survived through ingenuity and endurance that would challenge anyone's understanding of human resilience. The rhythm of his days had been shaped by a lifetime of winter negotiations. The mudlark's story unfolds slowly. It's punctuated by his continued searching and by the need to pause occasionally in doorways where the wind is less cutting. He tells Mayhew of beginning this work as a child, following his father along the Thames shores during low tide, learning to spot the glint of metal and mud, the particular shape of coal. Among river stones, the way certain areas yielded better findings after storms or high tides. He speaks of the hierarchy even among scavengers, how the Thames mudlarks look down slightly on the street mudlarks, how certain areas were claimed by particular individuals, how the finding of a truly valuable object could transform a week or a month, but how such findings had become rarer as the city grew and more people entered the trade of scavenging. Winter, he explains, changed everything about the work. The Thames shores became treacherous with ice, the mud harder to search, the cold making his hands too stiff to easily identify objects by touch. Street scavenging became more viable in winter, but also more competitive, as others who had outdoor summer work were forced into the same desperate searching for dropped coins, lost nails, forgotten fragments of value. In the patient silence of deep listening, whole worlds revealed themselves, as Mayhew writes. He becomes aware of the theater of survival playing out around them. A woman passes, carrying a baby wrapped so thoroughly in shawls and rags that only the smallest portion of face is visible, and that face is pale as snow except for the bright red of cold-chapped cheeks. She walks with the particular gait of someone conserving energy, each step deliberate and economical, heading toward some destination that might offer warmth or work or the possibility of a small kindness. A group of children huddles around a street lamp, not for its warmth, for gas lamps provide almost no heat, but for its light, which allows them to continue whatever small trade or game keeps them out in the cold, rather than returning to lodgings that might be no warmer than the street itself. Their voices create a small bubble of human sound in the fog-muffled city, high, and clear in the way that only children's voices can be, carrying further in the cold air than adult conversation. Mayhew asks the mudlark about these children, learns of the particular cruelties that winter visits upon the youngest residents of London's poorest neighborhoods. Children too young for formal employment, but old enough to contribute to family survival, find themselves engaged in work that winter makes exponentially more difficult and dangerous. Selling matches on corners where frostbite threatens their fingers. Carrying messages through fog so thick they must navigate by memory and instinct. Gathering fuel from sources that require them to venture into areas where ice makes every step a potential catastrophe. The rhythm of his inquiry revealed patterns invisible to casual observation. Through conversation with the mudlark, Mayhew begins to understand the intricate economics of winter survival among London's poor. He learns that certain items become more valuable in cold weather. Fragments of cloth that can be used for additional insulation. Pieces of metal that can be sold to ironmongers for slightly higher prices. When construction work slows and metal becomes scarcer, it's even seemingly worthless items like paper and cardboard that can be burned for brief warmth or used to stuff gaps in inadequate clothing. The mudlark explains the particular skills required for winter scavenging, how to identify in dim light and thick fog which shadows might conceal dropped objects, how to move efficiently through slush and ice without wasting energy on unnecessary steps, how to negotiate with other scavengers for access to promising areas, how to judge which findings are worth the energy required to collect them, and which should be left for someone more desperate. As their conversation continues, other figures begin to materialize from the fog drawn. Perhaps by the unusual sight of a well-dressed man engaged in lengthy conversation with someone from their world, curious about whether this interaction might represent opportunity or threat. A woman approaches, her face hidden beneath a shawl, leading a child by the hand. An older man with a barrel organ slung across his back pauses nearby, pretending to adjust his instrument while listening to the conversation. In the gathering darkness, London's hidden community began to reveal itself. Mayhew recognizes this moment for what it is. It's an opportunity to glimpse the complex social networks that exist among London's poor, the ways they communicate and protect and support each other through the particular hardships that winter brings. He asks gentle questions, writes careful notes, and gradually, stories begin to emerge from the fog like morning light, slowly dispelling darkness. The woman with the child tells him of work that exists only in winter. Mending clothes for families whose summer garments prove inadequate for cold weather, but who cannot afford new clothing. Her fingers, she shows him, are permanently stained with the dyes she uses to restore faded fabric, and permanently painful from the tiny needles that are the tools of her trade. The child beside her, she explains, helps by threading needles. Work that requires the steady hands of youth, though the cold makes even young fingers stiff and clumsy. The organ grinder speaks of how winter changes his route through the city. How certain neighborhoods that welcome music in warmer weather become hostile. When residents must choose between opening windows to hear melodies and keeping them closed to preserve heat. He has learned to play softer tunes in winter, songs that can be heard through glass and wood, melodies that speak of warmth and comfort rather than celebration and joy. The rhythm of his documentation captured voices that might otherwise have been lost to winter's silence. Each conversation Mayhew records reveals new layers of adaptation and endurance. He learns of the informal networks that keep London's poor alive through winter. How information about available work spreads through the community faster than any official notice. How small kindnesses are remembered and repaid when possible. How even among those who have almost nothing, there exists a complex economy of mutual aid and shared resources. A young man tells him of work cleaning ice from wealthy families' front steps and walkways. It's dangerous work that requires early morning hours when ice is thickest. But that provides wages exactly when other outdoor employment becomes impossible. The young man shows Mayhew hands that are permanently scarred from slips and falls, but speaks with pride of his reputation for reliability, of customers who specifically request his services because they know he will appear regardless of weather. An older woman describes the particular challenges faced by those who depend on washing work during winter months. Clothes frozen on lines must be brought in and thawed before they can dry properly, doubling the time required for each load. Water for washing must sometimes be heated over precious fires, using fuel that could otherwise provide personal warmth. The harsh soaps required for cleaning in cold water leave hands cracked and bleeding, making each subsequent washing session more painful than the last. In the patient accumulation of detail, larger truths began to emerge. As Mayhew continues his winter wanderings, notebook filling with observations and conversations, he begins to recognize patterns that reveal the true architecture of poverty in London's coldest season. He sees how winter operates as a great sorting mechanism, separating those with small reserves of money or resources from those living on the absolute edge of survival. He observes how cold weather creates cascading crises, how a few days of illness can mean lost work, how lost work leads to inability to pay for fuel, how lack of fuel makes illness more likely, creating cycles that trap individuals and families in deepening spirals of hardship. His notes capture the particular vocabulary of winter poverty, words and phrases that exist only in this season, only among those for whom cold is not an inconvenience but a mortal threat. Blue cold, for the stage of hypothermia that precedes true danger. Smoke luck, for the fortune of finding fuel that burns cleanly rather than choking smoke. Fog lost, for the disorientation that overcomes even longtime residents when the fog grows too thick for navigation. Through conversation with a crossing sweeper, it's one of those figures who kept small sections of street clear of horse droppings and debris in exchange for coins from passers-by, Mayhew learns of the psychological challenges that winter brings alongside its physical hardships. The crossing sweeper, a man of middle years whose face bears the permanent flush of someone constantly exposed to cold wind, speaks of how the endless gray of London winter affects the mind as much as the body. The rhythm of his inquiry moved like a gentle tide, revealing treasures with each patient advance. "The fog gets into your thoughts, sir," the crossing sweeper explains, his broom moving in steady, practiced strokes despite the conversation. Days go by when you can't see more than a few feet in any direction, when the sun might as well not exist for all the good it does. Makes a man feel like he's living in a dream, or like the world is shrunk down to just the few feet around him. Mayhew writes this observation with particular care, recognizing in it something that speaks to winter's effect on the human spirit. The fog that defines London winter operates not just as a physical obstacle, but as a psychological presence, creating isolation even in the midst of one of the world's most densely populated cities. People become islands of warmth and consciousness, moving through gray seas of uncertainty. Connected to others only through brief encounters, voices heard but not seen, presence felt but not confirmed. The crossing sweeper continues his work as he talks, and Mayhew observes the particular rhythm of winter street cleaning. How the broom must be wielded differently when fingers are numb. How the debris of cold weather requires different techniques than summer's dust and refuse. Horse droppings freeze solid, becoming almost like stones that must be chipped away rather than swept. Ice forms in patches that must be broken carefully to avoid creating larger hazards. Snow, when it falls, initially makes the work easier by covering the worst of the street's surface. But as it melts and refreezes, it creates a slush that seems to multiply the amount of cleaning required. In the gentle accumulation of observed detail, patterns of endurance emerged. Moving through the winter evening, Mayhew encounters a flower seller who has adapted her trade to the season in ways that speak to the ingenuity, born of necessity, instead of fresh flowers which cannot survive the cold she sells. Small bundles of evergreen sprigs, holly, ivy, pine gathered from the city's parks and squares during early morning hours when groundskeepers are less likely to object to such harvesting. "People want something green in winter, sir," she explains, her words slightly slurred by lips too cold to move with precision. Something that speaks of life continuing even when everything else seems dead or dying. A sprig of holly on a windowsill doesn't provide warmth, but it provides something else. Hope, perhaps, or just the memory of seasons when life was easier. Her basket, lined with cloth to protect the greenery from frost, represents a small mobile garden in a season when gardens sleep. The holly berries glisten like small red jewels in the gaslight, and the scent of pine rises faintly from her wares, providing a sharp, clean contrast to the omnipresent smell of coal smoke and fog that defines winter London. Mayhew asks about her customers and learns of the complex relationship between poverty and the desire for beauty that persists even in the hardest circumstances. Her buyers are not the wealthy who have access to hothouse flowers and elaborate decorations, but other members of London's working poor who save small coins to purchase. These modest reminders that the world contains more than cold and smoke and struggle. The rhythm of his documentation revealed humanity persisting in the smallest gestures. As Mayhew continues his winter wanderings, his notebook begins to fill with observations that speak to the particular ways that cold weather reshapes human interaction. He notes how people stand closer together at omnibus stops, not from social warmth but from the simple physics of shared body heat. He observes the way conversations become shorter and more efficient, with pleasantries abbreviated by the practical need to minimize exposure to cold air. He documents the small rituals that develop around public fires, the braziers that burn outside, certain shops, the warming rooms that some churches provide during daylight. Hours the way groups form and reform around these sources of heat, with an etiquette born of shared desperation. There is order, even in desperation, he notes, courtesy even among those who have been stripped of almost everything else. In his conversations with the chimney sweep, a man whose trade makes him intimate with fire and smoke and heat, but who emerges from each day's work into the same bitter cold that challenges everyone else, Mayhew learns of the particular hazards that winter brings to already dangerous work. Chimneys that have been burning continuously for weeks become hotter, more dangerous to clean, while the contrast between their internal heat and the external cold creates additional risks for those who must navigate between these extremes multiple times each day. In the patient attention to individual stories, larger truths took shape. The chimney sweep, man of perhaps 30, whose age is disguised by the permanent coating of soot that marks his profession, speaks of how winter changes the very nature of his relationship with fire. In summer, climbing into a recently used chimney is uncomfortable but manageable. In winter, the same chimney becomes a refuge, a few minutes of genuine warmth that his body craves even as his mind recognizes the dangers of lingering too long in the heat. Sometimes, sir, the sweep confides, I find myself staying longer than I should in a warm chimney, just feeling what it's like to have heat reach all the way to my bones. Dangerous thinking that, the longer you stay, the harder it is when you come back out into the cold. But winter makes you hungry for warmth in ways that summer folk can't understand. Mayhew writes this observation with particular care, recognizing in it something that speaks to the psychological as well as physical toll of London's winter poverty. The sweep's words reveal how prolonged exposure to cold changes not just the body, but the relationship between body and mind, creating cravings and needs that go beyond simple physical comfort into something approaching spiritual necessity. The rhythm of his inquiry revealed the intricate geography of winter survival. Through his notebooks, Mayhew maps not just the physical geography of winter London, but its emotional and social landscapes as well. He learns which streets provide the best shelter from wind, which doorways are tolerant of brief rest, which areas of the city offer the most opportunity for small earnings when traditional employment becomes impossible. A costermonger, one of London's street vendors who sells fruit and vegetables from a cart, explains to Mayhew the particular challenges of maintaining trade. When both vendor and customer are focused primarily on escaping the cold as quickly as possible, winter vegetables, the costermonger notes, must be protected from frost while displayed, requiring constant attention and small fires that compete with profit margins. Customers make decisions quickly, without the leisurely consideration that warmer weather allows. They prefer foods that promise internal warmth, hot chestnuts, baked potatoes, anything that can provide a few moments of heat from within. People don't linger in winter, sir, the costermonger observes, his breath visible as small clouds between words. In summer, they might examine every apple, discuss the weather, make conversation. Winter makes everyone urgent, makes every transaction a race against the cold. In the gentle persistence of his questioning, hidden economies revealed themselves. Mayhew discovers through these winter conversations the existence of trades and services that exist only during cold months, created by necessity and sustained by the particular needs that winter brings. He meets women who specialize in mending gloves and mittens, their own hands damaged by the constant handling of cold fabric and metal needles, but whose skill in creating or repairing hand coverings makes them essential to winter survival for others. He encounters men who have developed expertise in finding and selling fuel, not just coal, but the countless combustible items that can provide warmth when coal becomes unaffordable. These fuel gatherers know which construction sites might yield wood scraps, which areas of the city produce paper waste suitable for burning, which shops might provide sawdust or shavings that burn cleanly and provide substantial heat. A woman who specializes in winter food preparation explains to Mayhew the art of creating maximum nutrition from minimal resources. When cold weather increases the body's need for fuel, she speaks of soups that can be stretched with water and still provide warmth, of ways to prepare cheap cuts of meat so they become tender, and warming of teas brewed from herbs that can be gathered even in winter and that provide both warmth and small amounts of nutrition. The rhythm of his work captured voices that spoke of adaptation, endurance, quiet dignity. Through a conversation with a man who makes his living selling hot drinks from a portable stove, Mayhew learns of the complex relationship between warmth and commerce that defines winter London. The drink seller, whose small cart carries containers of hot tea, coffee, and cocoa, explains how his busiest hours come not during the coldest weather, when few people venture out with money to spend, but during those slightly warmer periods when people emerge from their shelters, but still crave internal warmth. Too cold and nobody's on the streets, the drink seller explains, stirring his wares with hands that are permanently stained from handling hot metal and cold air. Not cold enough, and they don't feel the need for what I'm selling. There's a particular kind of cold, sharp, but not desperate, that makes people willing to spend their last few pence on something hot to drink. His stove, an ingenious contraption of metal and charcoal, represents both his livelihood and his burden. It provides the heat necessary for his trade, but it also requires constant attention, constant feeding with fuel, constant protection from wind and weather. In summer, he might set up anywhere and find customers. In winter, he must position himself strategically near omnibus stops, where people wait exposed to cold, outside churches, where congregations emerge from relative warmth into bitter air, in areas where foot traffic is concentrated, but where he can also find some shelter for his equipment. In the silence between stories, the vast scope of winter London began to reveal itself. As the evening deepens and the fog grows even thicker, Mayhew finds himself part of a slow-moving procession of figures, all heading toward areas of the city that promise some form of shelter or warmth. He follows this human stream toward a district where lodging houses provide beds for those who can pay and floor space for those who cannot afford beds, but can manage a few pence for the privilege of sleeping indoors. The lodging house, when they reach it, presents itself as a study in the economics of warmth and shelter during London's winter months. The main room, crowded with perhaps 50 people, is warmed by a single large fire that provides enough heat to prevent freezing but not enough to create true comfort. The air is thick with the breath and body heat of too many people in too small a space. But this same crowding that would be unbearable in summer becomes a survival strategy in winter. The rhythm of shared space created its own form of community. Mayhew observes the informal hierarchy that governs access to the fire. The way spaces closest to the hearth are claimed by those who have either been longest in residence or who have demonstrated some form of leadership or protection for others. He notes how newcomers are gradually accepted into the group's warmth as they prove their intention to contribute to, rather than drain, the collective resources of heat and space. Conversations in the lodging house move at the particular pace of people conserving energy, words spoken softly to avoid disturbing others' topics, focusing on practical matters. Where work might be found tomorrow, which areas of the city are most sheltered from wind, whose turn it is to tend the fire through the night. Mayhew listens to these conversations with the attention of someone who recognizes them as literature, as poetry born of necessity, as voices that speak truths about human endurance that no amount of wealth or comfort can teach. A young woman, perhaps 16, tells Mayhew of her work in a match factory, where winter brings both increased demand for the product and increased danger in its production. The chemicals used in matchmaking, she explains, affect the hands and lungs more severely in cold weather, while the work itself must continue at an increased pace to meet winter's higher demand for sources of fire and light. In the patient accumulation of winter voices, a portrait of the city emerged. Through his winter notebooks, Mayhew creates not just a record of individual hardship, but a map of how an entire city adapts to survive its harshest season. His observations reveal the informal institutions that develop to support life when formal institutions prove inadequate. The networks of information sharing, resource pooling, and mutual protection that operate below the surface of official London society. He documents the particular kindnesses that emerge in winter, how shopkeepers sometimes allow brief warming near their fires, how omnibus drivers occasionally permit fareless passengers to ride short distances when the alternative is freezing, how even among direct competitors for the same scarce resources, moments of cooperation and compassion create small islands of warmth in the vast cold sea of winter survival. The rhythm of his work moved toward understanding rather than judgment. As Mayhew's winter research continues, he begins to recognize that he is documenting not just individual stories, but an entire parallel civilization that exists within London, society with its own customs, its own economy, its own forms of art and beauty and community, all shaped by the fundamental challenge of surviving winter without the resources that wealth provides. His final notebook entries from this particular winter evening capture a moment that seems to encapsulate everything he has observed. Standing outside the lodging house as snow begins to fall more heavily, he watches through a steamed window as the people inside arrange themselves for sleep. Bodies curl together for warmth. Blankets are shared with mathematical precision. The fire is banked carefully to last as long as possible through the night. In this single room, Mayhew writes, "I see the same impulses toward beauty, community, and care that define human nature everywhere, but refined and intensified by necessity into their most essential forms." Winter strips away everything non-essential, revealing the core of what people need from each other to survive, to maintain dignity, to continue hoping for something better. As the snow falls softly outside, covering the city in temporary silence, we prepare to drift toward other mysteries. Mayhew closes his notebook for the evening, but his work in documenting London's winter voices will continue for years to come. His patient attention to individual stories will eventually fill volumes, creating a record of winter survival that preserves not just the facts of hardship, but the dignity and ingenuity with which that hardship was faced, through his gentle questioning and careful observation. Henry Mayhew showed that even in the depths of London's harshest winters, human creativity and compassion found ways to flourish. His notebooks became windows into a world that most preferred not to see, voices speaking from the fog of history to remind us that survival itself can be a form of art when practiced with such quiet skill and enduring grace. Let us now drift from individual voices into the very atmosphere that shaped them all. Picture yourself standing on Westminster Bridge in the winter of 1852, your hands gripping the cold stone balustrade as you peer into what seems like the edge of the world itself. Before you, behind you, around you, in every direction, London has disappeared into a wall of yellow-gray, mystery that transforms the familiar city into something from a dream or a fairy tale. The fog hangs so thick that the gas lamps burning just yards away appear as dim halos of light, floating without context, disconnected from the posts that hold them, like fallen stars suspended in an ocean of gray. This is London's most famous and mysterious creation. The fog that would inspire countless writers challenged the understanding of scientists and shaped the very identity of the world's largest city. But what exactly was this phenomenon that Londoners came to know simply as the fog? And how did it manage to transform an entire metropolis into something otherworldly every winter for more than a century? In the thick silence that surrounded the city, mysteries took shape like shadows. The fog that engulfed London during its winter months was unlike anything that occurs naturally in the world. It was, in essence, a collaboration between nature and industry, a marriage of the Thames Valley's natural tendency toward mist and the countless tons of coal smoke that poured from chimneys, factories, and heating fires throughout the city. When atmospheric conditions were just right, when cold air settled into the river valley and refused to move, when humidity levels rose to the precise point of saturation, London's coal smoke would merge with natural moisture to create something entirely new. Scientists of the Victorian era called it a fog, but they recognized even then that this phenomenon differed substantially from the clean, white mists that might rise from countryside meadows or coastal waters. London's winter fog carried color, yellow from sulfur compounds, brown from coal tar, sometimes even hints of green from the chemical reactions occurring within its dense clouds. It carried smell, the sharp bite of burning coal, the metallic temps of industrial processes, the organic decay of a city whose sanitation systems struggled to keep pace with its growth. Most mysteriously of all, London's fog seemed to carry intelligence, moving through the city with patterns that defied simple explanation. It would linger for days in some areas, while lifting quickly from others, would suddenly thicken or thin without apparent cause, trapping people in familiar streets they could no longer navigate, or revealing landmarks they thought lost forever. Imagine yourself there, moving through that yellow-wrapped world where sight ended at arm's length. On the worst fog days, days that Londoners came to call pea soupers for their thick, yellow-green color and almost solid consistency, the city transformed into something that seemed more mythological than real. Carriages moved at walking pace, their drivers holding lanterns extended as far as possible in front of their horses, following the echo of hoofbeats off building walls to navigate streets they had traveled thousands of times but could no longer see. Pedestrians developed a peculiar way of moving through fog-bound London, shuffling rather than walking, keeping one hand extended to feel for obstacles, listening intently for the sounds that might indicate approaching traffic or the proximity of curbs and building walls. The fog muffled sound in strange ways, making distant noises seem close and close. Sounds seemed distant, creating an acoustic landscape that was as disorienting as the visual one. People became lost in neighborhoods they had known since childhood. The fog erased landmarks, turned familiar corners into mysteries, made the distance between home and work feel like a journey into uncharted territory. Stories circulated of individuals who spent hours wandering in circles, convinced they were traveling in straight lines, discovering only when the fog finally lifted that they had never moved more than a few blocks from their starting point. In the deep silence that fog created, London held its breath. The fog affected different parts of the city in different ways, creating a complex geography of visibility and blindness that changed with wind patterns, building heights, and the density of coal-burning activities. Areas near the Thames often experienced the thickest fog, as river moisture combined with the smoke from boats, docks, and riverside industries to create virtually impenetrable walls of gray-yellow air. Residential neighborhoods developed their own fog characteristics, depending on the number and type of chimneys, the width of streets, and the prevailing wind patterns. Some areas learned to expect fog that arrived suddenly and lifted quickly, while others settled into fog that might persist for days, creating a twilight world where noon felt like dusk and evening seemed to begin before afternoon had properly started. The wealthy neighborhoods of Mayfair and Belgravia, with their wider streets and fewer industrial sources of smoke, often experienced fog differently than the crowded districts of the East End. But even the wealthiest areas were not immune to the phenomenon that seemed to democratize mystery, making everyone equal in their inability to see more than a few feet ahead. The fog became London's signature, its calling card, its most distinctive feature. Writers and artists of the Victorian era found in London's fog an inexhaustible source of inspiration and metaphor. Charles Dickens wrote a fog that seemed to have personality, that moved through the city like a living thing with intentions and moods. He described fog as impartial, falling equally on rich and poor. But he also recognized the ways that fog affected the wealthy and the poor very differently. How those with warm homes and reliable fires could treat fog as atmospheric theater, while those without adequate shelter experienced it as another form of threat. The painter James McNeill Whistler found in London fog effects that challenged traditional approaches to representing light and atmosphere. His nocturnes of fog-wrapped Thames scenes captured something that photography could not, the way fog transformed color and form into suggestion and mood, the way familiar landmarks became abstract shapes floating in gray space. Arthur Conan Doyle used London fog as both setting and character in his Sherlock Holmes stories. Recognizing how the fog created perfect conditions for mystery and concealment, how it could hide both crime and detection. How it made the familiar city into a labyrinth, where logic and observation became more important than local knowledge. In the mystery of its composition, larger questions about the city revealed themselves. Scientists and physicians of the Victorian era debated endlessly about the fog's effects on human health. Some, particularly those representing industrial interests, argued that the fog was merely an inconvenience, an aesthetic problem that would resolve itself as the city grew and modernized. Others, often physicians working among the poor, insisted that the fog carried within it the seeds of disease and early death. The truth, as often happens with Victorian mysteries, lay somewhere between these positions. but was complicated by the social and economic factors that made objective study difficult. The wealthy, who lived in better heated homes and worked in cleaner environments, perceived fog differently than the poor, might spend entire days breathing its thick presence while working outdoors or in poorly ventilated factories. Respiratory ailments increased dramatically during fog seasons. What Londoners called fog fever created symptoms that ranged from mild coughing and irritation to severe bronchial distress that could last for weeks. Children and elderly residents were particularly vulnerable, developing chronic conditions that seemed to worsen with each successive winter's fog exposure. In the yellow silence, health and mystery intertwined like smoke and mist. The fog created its own medical vocabulary among London's poor. Fog lung described the persistent cough that many developed after prolonged exposure. Yellow sickness referred to the nausea and headaches that accompanied breathing heavily polluted air for extended periods. Fog blindness described the eye irritation that could make vision difficult, even when the fog itself was not particularly thick. Yet despite these health challenges, many Londoners developed a peculiar affection for their city's signature weather phenomenon. The fog, they argued, gave London character, made it unique among the world's great cities, created atmospheric effects that were undeniably beautiful, even when they were also dangerous and uncomfortable. Some claim that fog enhanced certain aspects of city life, that it muffled the harsh sounds of industrial activity, that it created intimate spaces within the vast metropolis, that it transformed even the poorest neighborhoods into places of mystery and potential beauty. Gas lamps burning through fog created effects that no other lighting could achieve, turning ordinary street corners into scenes that might have been painted by romantic artists. The fog moved through the city like a slow tide, revealing and concealing in equal measure. The thickness of London fog created unique opportunities for both crime and kindness that would have been impossible in clearer weather. Stories circulated of pickpockets who used fog as cover for their activities, able to approach victims unseen and disappear just as quickly into the gray anonymity that surrounded everyone. But equally common were stories of strangers helping lost travelers find their way, of people sharing shelter and warmth with others they could barely see, communities forming spontaneously around the shared challenge of navigating an invisible city. Police work became almost impossible during the thickest fog days. Criminal activity did not cease because visibility dropped to zero, but the ability to pursue and apprehend criminals became severely limited. Officers developed techniques for patrolling by sound rather than sight, learning to identify different types of footsteps, to distinguish between normal movement and furtive activity, to use the fog's acoustic properties to their advantage when possible. The fog also created opportunities for legitimate mystery and adventure. People found themselves in conversations with strangers they never properly saw, creating friendships or romances that began in gray anonymity and continued long after clear weather returned. The reduced visibility forced people to rely on voice, manner, and character rather than appearance for their first impressions of others. In the mystery of its behavior, the fog revealed the hidden patterns of the city. Meteorologists and amateur weather observers began to map the fog's movements and habits, discovering that it followed patterns related to wind, temperature, humidity, and the city's physical geography. The fog tended to be thickest in the early morning hours, when overnight cooling combined with increased industrial activity to create optimal conditions for its formation. It often lifted partially during midday, creating brief windows of improved visibility that Londoners learned to exploit for travel and outdoor work. The Thames played a crucial role in fog formation and movement, its water providing moisture while its valley shape trapped and concentrated the coal smoke that fed the fog's growth. Areas immediately adjacent to the river experienced the most dramatic fog effects, while neighborhoods on higher ground might remain relatively clear even when the riverside districts disappeared completely. Building height and street width affected fog behavior in ways that created microclimates within the larger fog system. Narrow alleys and courtyards could become completely choked with fog that refused to disperse, while broader thoroughfares might maintain some visibility even during generally poor conditions. Tall buildings created wind patterns that could either disperse fog or concentrate it, leading to the development of local knowledge about which routes remained passable when others became navigable. The fog became both London's shame and its strange beauty. Writers of the period struggled to capture the fog's contradictory nature. the way it could transform the ugliest industrial landscapes into scenes of ethereal beauty, while simultaneously making life more difficult and dangerous for everyone it touched. They wrote a fog that seemed to possess consciousness, that appeared to make decisions about where to settle and where to avoid, that responded to human activity in ways that seemed almost personal. The fog inspired a particular form of London poetry, verses that attempted to capture the experience of living within mystery, of navigating a world where the familiar had become strange and the strange had become routine. These poems spoke of fog as both enemy and companion, something that isolated individuals while paradoxically creating a shared experience that united all Londoners, regardless of class or circumstance. Painters found in the fog challenges and opportunities that changed the development of British art. Traditional techniques for representing landscape and architecture became inadequate when the subjects themselves were only partially visible, forcing artists to develop new approaches to color, form, and atmosphere that would influence artistic movements far beyond London and far beyond the Victorian era. In the yellow silence, time itself seemed to move differently. The fog changed the rhythm of London life in ways both subtle and profound. Business hours adapted to fog patterns, with many establishments opening later and closing earlier during periods of thick fog when customer traffic became impossible. Social calls and appointments were frequently postponed or canceled, creating a more flexible relationship with time and commitment that affected everything from commerce to romance. People developed fog-watching skills, learning to read the subtle signs that indicated whether conditions would improve or worsen, whether travel would be advisable or dangerous, whether outdoor work would be possible or futile. These skills became part of London's cultural knowledge, passed down through families and communities like other forms of practical wisdom. The fog created its own season within winter, days when the city existed in a perpetual twilight that began before dawn and continued past sunset. During these periods, London operated according to different rules, different rhythms, different expectations about what could be accomplished and what must be postponed until clearer weather returned. The mystery deepened with each winter season, each fog-bound day adding to its legend. Children growing up in fog-bound London developed different relationships with space and movement than children in clearer climates. They learned to navigate by touch and sound, to play games that did not require visual contact with other players, to find entertainment and adventure in conditions that adults found merely challenging or miserable. The fog became part of London childhood in ways that shaped character and imagination. Stories told during fog-bound evenings often featured themes of mystery, hidden treasure, and adventure found in familiar places transformed by limited visibility. Children learned songs that helped them remember routes home when landmarks became invisible, rhymes that counted steps between known points when visual navigation became impossible. Some children developed what adults called fog sight, an enhanced ability to navigate in limited visibility that combined heightened attention to non-visual cues with an almost intuitive sense of direction and distance. These children often became valuable guides during the worst fog days, leading adults through neighborhoods that had become mazes of gray uncertainty. In the gathering mystery, fog revealed the city's deepest secrets. The fog preserved secrets as effectively as it concealed landmarks. Activities that might be noticed and remarked upon in clear weather could proceed unobserved when fog reduced visibility to a few feet. This created opportunities for both mischief and kindness that required the cover of gray anonymity to flourish. Charitable activities often increased during fog periods, as donors could provide help without the social complications that might arise from being seen associating with London's poor. Conversely, the fog also concealed activities that society preferred not to acknowledge: the movements of the destitute, the desperate measures taken by those for whom conventional survival strategies had failed, the quiet deaths that occurred in doorways and alleys when cold and fog and poverty combined into lethal circumstances. The fog became London's great equalizer in ways both literal and metaphorical. Regardless of wealth or social position, everyone who ventured into fog-bound streets faced the same challenges of navigation and the same risks of becoming lost or disoriented. The fog made everyone equal in their dependence on non-visual senses, their need for patience and careful movement, their vulnerability to the city's hidden hazards. The rhythm of fog-bound days created their own strange peace. During the thickest fog periods, London took on an almost meditative quality. The normal pace of city life slowed dramatically, forced into rhythms more compatible with limited visibility and uncertain footing. Conversations happened at closer distances, requiring a kind of intimacy that clear weather rarely demanded. People listened more carefully, spoke more deliberately, moved with more attention to their immediate surroundings. The fog created acoustic effects that musicians and sound enthusiasts found fascinating. Church bells carried differently through fog, their bronze voices seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Street musicians discovered that fog changed the way their instruments sounded, often improving the acoustics by creating a natural dampening effect that softened harsh tones and enhanced resonant ones. Some Londoners developed what they called fog hearing, an enhanced ability to interpret the sounds of the fog-wrapped city, to distinguish between the footsteps of different types of people, to identify the approach of various vehicles by their particular acoustic signatures, to use echo and reverberation to judge distance and direction when visual cues became useless. In the mystery of its creation, the fog held clues to London's transformation. The fog served as a visible manifestation of London's rapid industrialization, a daily reminder of the environmental cost of the city's growth and prosperity. Each winter fog was in essence a cloud of the previous months. Industrial activity, the accumulated emissions of countless furnaces, factories, and domestic fires made visible and immediate in ways that forced even the most socially isolated residents to literally breathe the consequences of their city's development. Scientists who studied the fog discovered that its composition varied dramatically depending on weather patterns, industrial activity, and seasonal factors. Winter fog contained higher concentrations of sulfur compounds. As domestic heating increased the number of coal fires burning throughout the city, fog that formed during periods of increased factory activity carried different chemical signatures than fog that developed during quieter industrial periods. The fog became a subject of international curiosity and concern. Visitors to London wrote detailed accounts of their experiences navigating fog-bound streets, creating a literature of atmospheric adventure that portrayed the city as a place where ordinary activities became extraordinary challenges. Foreign newspapers published articles about London fog with a mixture of fascination and horror, describing a city that seemed to exist in a perpetual state of twilight mystery. The fog moved through seasons and years, accumulating its own history. Longtime London residents developed personal relationships with the fog that went beyond simple practical adaptation. They learned to read its moods and patterns, to predict its behavior based on subtle changes in color, density, and movement. Extant, some claimed they could distinguish between different types of fog. Morning fog that would lift by noon, evening fog that would persist through the night, the particularly dense fog that preceded snowfall. The thin fog that indicated clearing weather was approaching. Elderly Londoners spoke of fog with a mixture of complaint and affection, describing it as an old acquaintance whose habits were annoying, but whose presence had become so familiar that its absence felt strange. They told stories of fog-bound courtships, where couples met and fell in love without initially seeing each other clearly. Relationships that began with voices in the gray and only later revealed the faces behind the words. The fog created its own folklore and superstitions. Some believed that fog brought good luck to certain activities, while cursing others. Street vendors claimed that fog days, despite their challenges, sometimes brought unexpected windfalls as desperate customers paid premium prices for goods that promised warmth or comfort. Others insisted that fog attracted spirits or supernatural activities, that the boundary between the natural and supernatural worlds became thinner when the physical world itself became less solid and certain. In the thick silence, the city's ghosts seemed closer, more present. The fog preserved moments in ways that clear weather could not. Conversations overheard in fog had a different quality, more intimate and mysterious, because the speakers remained invisible. Music heard through fog seemed to come from another world, disconnected from its source, floating freely through the gray air like auditory memories. Fog created temporary communities among strangers who found themselves sharing shelter in doorways or gathered around street fires. These fog-bound gatherings had their own etiquette and customs, ways of sharing space and warmth. that acknowledged both the temporary nature of the association and the genuine need for human connection during periods when the familiar world became strange and uncertain. Some Londoners claimed that fog enhanced certain perceptions while diminishing others. Colors, when they could be seen at all, appeared more vivid against the gray background. Smells became more prominent when visual input was reduced. Touch became more important as a way of understanding and navigating the world, leading to a heightened awareness of texture, temperature, and physical space. The mystery of fog deepened with each winter's return. Weather records from the Victorian era show that London fog followed long-term patterns that seemed to correspond with the city's industrial development, population growth, and coal consumption. Years with particularly severe winters produced fog that was not only thicker, but also more persistent, hanging over the city for weeks at a time and creating health crises that affected thousands of residents. The fog became a subject of parliamentary debate and scientific study, with various theories proposed for its control or elimination. Some suggested that broader streets would allow better air circulation and fog dispersal. Others proposed regulations on coal burning or industrial emissions. A few visionaries suggested alternative forms of heating and lighting that might reduce the smoke that fed the fog gas formation. But the fog persisted, winter after winter, becoming as much a part of London's identity as the Thames itself or the great monuments that it regularly concealed. Maps were created showing fog-prone areas and fog-free zones. But these maps proved frustratingly inadequate, as the fog demonstrated again and again its refusal to follow predictable patterns or respect human attempts at categorization. In the patient mystery of its presence, the fog taught its own lessons. The fog forced Londoners to develop patience as a survival skill, to accept uncertainty as a normal condition of life, to find beauty and meaning in circumstances that might otherwise inspire only frustration or fear. It taught the value of preparation, of carrying light sources and warm clothing, even when the morning seemed clear. Because fog could descend with surprising speed and transform a simple journey into an adventure. Children learned fog games that adults found increasingly useful ways of moving safely in limited visibility. Techniques for staying oriented when landmarks disappeared, methods for calling to others and interpreting responses that indicated direction and distance. These games became practical skills that served throughout life in a city where fog was always a possibility. The fog also taught lessons about community and mutual aid that extended far beyond weather-related challenges. During fog-bound periods, Londoners developed habits of checking on neighbors, sharing information about safe routes and passable streets, offering guidance to travelers who had become lost or disoriented. These habits of mutual assistance often persisted even during clear weather, creating social bonds that might not have formed under normal circumstances. As we drift deeper into the fog's embrace, its secrets whisper through the yellow silence. Perhaps most mysteriously of all, the fog seemed to affect memory and perception in ways that were difficult to explain or study systematically. People reported that experiences during fog-bound periods felt dreamlike, less substantial than experiences during clear weather, but also more memorable in certain ways. The enhanced attention required for navigation and the reduced sensory input seemed to create conditions where other forms of awareness became more prominent. Some Londoners claimed that fog periods were times of enhanced creativity and introspection when the reduced external stimulation allowed for deeper thought and more vivid imagination. Writers reported that some of their best work emerged during fog-bound days when the usual distractions of city life were muffled and subdued by the gray presence that surrounded everything. The fog became a natural laboratory for studying human adaptation to challenging environmental conditions. Londoners developed enhanced hearing, improved spatial awareness, better balance and coordination in difficult conditions, and increased sensitivity to changes in air quality and atmospheric pressure. These adaptations represented a form of urban evolution, changes in human capability that emerged in response to the particular challenges of life in a fog-bound city. In the gentle mystery of its persistence, the fog became part of London's soul. As our exploration of London's fog mystery draws toward its close, we might consider how this atmospheric phenomenon served as both metaphor and reality for the city's relationship with its own rapid transformation. The fog was literal, a real, measurable atmospheric condition that affected daily life in concrete ways. But it was also symbolic, representing the ways that industrial progress created new forms of beauty and danger simultaneously. the ways that human adaptation could find grace and meaning even in the most challenging circumstances. The fog reminded Londoners daily that they lived in a city unlike anywhere else in the world, a place where nature and industry had combined to create conditions that were both magnificent and terrible, both inspiring and challenging. It forced residents to develop new ways of relating to their environment, new skills for navigation and survival, new forms of art and literature that could capture experiences unknown to people living under clearer skies. As the fog settles around us like a yellow blanket, we prepare to emerge into other mysteries. Tonight, as we drift through these fog-bound streets in our imagination, we can perhaps understand why London fog became such a powerful symbol in Victorian literature and art. It represented the unknown, the mysterious, the beautiful, terrible aspects of life in the world's largest industrial city. It made the familiar strange and the strange familiar, creating daily opportunities for wonder and challenge that shaped the character of everyone who learned to live within its yellow embrace. The fog holds its secrets, still carrying within its mystery the voices of all those who learned to navigate its challenges, to find beauty in its strangeness, to discover in its gray silence the particular forms of community and creativity that can emerge when the familiar world becomes temporarily unknowable, temporarily transformed into something that exists at the very edge of dream and reality. Elsewhere, as the fog wraps the city in its yellow embrace, another London emerges. Step with me now through the heavy oak doors of a Belgravia townhouse, where the brass knocker gleams despite the sooty air outside, where gas lamps and crystal fixtures cast steady light into rooms that seem to exist in an entirely different season from the streets we have just left behind. Here in the heart of London's most fashionable district, winter arrives not as an adversary to be endured, but as a backdrop for comfort. A stage upon which wealth displays its power to transform even the harshest weather into an opportunity for beauty and pleasure. The contrast is immediate and overwhelming. Where moments ago we moved through air thick with fog and coal smoke, here, the atmosphere is warm and clear-scented with beeswax. Candles, fresh flowers brought from heated greenhouses, and the particular mixture of luxury that comes from fine fabrics, polished wood, and spaces heated without regard for the cost of fuel. The silence after the muffled sounds of fog-bound streets feels almost sacred or quiet, broken only by the gentle crackle of coal fires that burned continuously in every room, the soft rustle of silk gowns, the musical chime of a clock marking time in a world where time moves differently than it does in the cold streets outside. Imagine yourself there, stepping into warmth as solid and enveloping as a physical embrace. Lady Margaret Pemberton adjusts her cashmere shawl, not from cold, for her morning room is heated to perfect comfort, but as a gesture of elegant habit, a small movement that speaks to the rituals of refinement that govern her winter days. She stands near tall windows that look out onto Eaton Square, though the view this January morning reveals little beyond the same yellow fog that challenges the poor, the same frost-covered cobblestones that make travel treacherous for those who must walk. But from her perspective, surrounded by warmth and comfort, the fog becomes merely atmospheric, a picturesque element that enhances rather than threatens her winter morning. The room itself tells the story of how wealth transforms winter from survival challenge into seasonal entertainment. Heavy velvet curtains in deep burgundy frame the windows, thick enough to block drafts but arranged to admit whatever pale light filters through the fog. Persian carpets layer the floor, creating islands of warmth and beauty that eliminate any possibility of cold stone or bare wood touching silk-stocking feet. The fireplace, carved from Italian marble, houses a coal fire that burns with steady brightness, tended by servants whose invisible efficiency ensures that fuel never runs low and flames never dim. Every detail of the room speaks to winter comfort elevated to art. Hothouse flowers, roses, orchids, camellias, create gardens of color and fragrance that make the season outside seem like a distant rumor. Books bound in leather and gold occupy shelves within easy reach of comfortable chairs upholstered in fabric that costs more than most Londoners earned in a year. Small tables hold delicate china tea services, crystal decanters filled with spirits that warm from within, silver boxes containing sweets and delicacies that provide pleasure rather than mere sustenance. In the gentle rhythm of privileged days, winter became a canvas for comfort. Lady Margaret's morning routine unfolds according to schedules that acknowledge winter only as an opportunity for different pleasures. Alternative forms of beauty and entertainment, she is awakened not to frost on cracked windows, but to a bedroom where fires were lit hours before dawn, where thick curtains and heavy blankets created a cocoon of warmth that made the transition from sleep to waking as gentle as breathing. Her morning chocolate arrived at precisely 8 o'clock, carried on a silver tray by a housemaid whose own battle with the cold streets began hours earlier, but whose struggles remain invisible in these warm rooms. The clothing laid out for Lady Margaret's consideration represents winter fashion as art rather than necessity. Silk and velvet gowns and jewel tones that complement the season's mood without acknowledging its hardships. Cashmere shawls and ermine-trimmed capes that provide warmth so luxurious it transforms the very concept of cold into something desirable, something that allows the display of beautiful defenses against discomfort. Her jewelry, sapphires and diamonds that catch and reflect the firelight, serves not just as ornament, but as tiny prisms that create beauty from the very sources of warmth that keep winter at bay. The mirror before which she sits for her morning toilette reflects a face that shows no signs of winter's harsh effects. Her skin remains soft and pale, protected from wind and weather by carriages and sheltered walkways, by rooms that maintain perfect temperature and humidity, by cosmetics and treatments that costly beyond the dreams of those who face winter's challenges directly. Her hands, as she lifts a silver brush to arrange hair that gleams with health and careful tending, show no cracks from cold, no stains from rough work, no signs that winter affects her world at all. The rhythm of her days move to winter's gentler music. Lady Margaret's social calendar for this fog-bound January day includes activities that treat winter as entertainment rather than obstacle. A morning visit to her dressmaker, where the latest fashions from Paris will be adapted for London's particular winter social season. Warm carriages with heated foot warmers will carry her through streets where fog creates atmosphere rather than anxiety, where the yellow haze outside the carriage windows becomes a romantic backdrop for the comfort and conversation within. The afternoon promises tea with friends in drawing rooms as warm and beautiful as her own, where the conversation will touch on winter only as it affects social plans and fashion choices. Should the planned evening be postponed if the fog thickens? Which furs are most fashionable this season? How charmingly the gas lamps create halos in the mist, like something from a Gothic romance novel. These conversations unfold in rooms where winter never intrudes as discomfort or threat, where the season exists only as aesthetic choice and social consideration. The women who gather for these afternoon teas move through their days surrounded by warmth so complete and reliable that cold becomes merely a concept, something that affects the view from their windows but never touches their actual experience. In the silence between pleasures, privilege revealed its own particular isolation. Yet even within these warm cocoons of comfort, winter makes its presence known in subtler ways. The quality of light that filters through fog-wrapped windows creates a particular atmosphere in even the most luxurious rooms. A golden dimness that requires additional candles and gas flames that transforms the most familiar spaces into something more intimate, more enclosed than summer's bright openness allows. The fog outside affects even the wealthy, though in ways so different from its effects on the poor that they might be describing entirely different phenomena. For Lady Margaret, fog means that evening entertainments become more intimate affairs, that fewer people venture out for social calls, that the usual rhythms of London society slow and deepen into something more exclusive and intense. The sounds of fog-bound London reach even into Belgravia's warm drawing rooms, though filtered and softened by thick walls and heavy curtains. The muffled clip-clop of horses moving cautiously through invisible streets, the occasional call of a driver trying to navigate by sound rather than sight, the distant ring of church bells that seem to come from everywhere and nowhere. These sounds create atmosphere for the wealthy, rather than anxiety contributing to the sense that winter transforms their familiar city into something more mysterious and romantic. Imagine yourself there, observing how comfort shapes perception. The morning's newspapers delivered despite fog and cold by servants, whose journey through winter streets remains invisible to those who read their contents by warm firesides, bring news of the outside world filtered through the particular lens of class and privilege. Reports of winter hardships among the poor are received with expressions of sympathy and charity. But from the safety of rooms where such hardships exist only as abstractions, problems to be addressed through donations and good works, rather than as immediate threats to comfort or survival. Lady Margaret reads these accounts while sipping tea from china so delicate it seems to capture and hold the warmth, while surrounded by comfort so complete that the sufferings described might be taking place in another country rather than in neighborhoods just miles away. Her sympathy is genuine, but necessarily limited by the impossibility of truly understanding experiences, so removed from her own reality of uninterrupted warmth and beauty. The charitable activities that occupy much of her winter social calendar committees to provide blankets for the poor, subscriptions to soup kitchens, support for schools and working-class districts represent genuine concern filtered through layers of comfort that make direct understanding impossible. She can donate money, organize fundraising events, coordinate with other ladies of similar position and concern, but the actual experience of cold as mortal threat rather than minor inconvenience remains as foreign to her as life on another planet. The rhythm of privileged winter moved to its own protected pulse. The servants who make this warm world possible move like shadows through Lady Margaret's consciousness, present when needed, invisible when not required, their own struggles with winter cold and fog existing in a parallel universe that occasionally intersects with, but never disrupts, the smooth functioning of comfort and beauty. The housemaids who rise before dawn to light fires, the footmen who brave fog-bound streets to deliver messages and collect packages, the cook who navigates frozen markets to ensure that meals appear as scheduled and expected. These figures enable the transformation of winter from challenge into pleasure. But their enabling work remains largely unacknowledged in the warm rooms where its results are enjoyed. When Lady Margaret ventures out in her carriage for social calls or shopping expeditions, the winter city becomes a spectacle viewed from behind glass and warmth. The fog that disorients and threatens pedestrians becomes atmospheric theater from the safety of a heated carriage with thick cushions and fur-lap robes. The ice that makes walking treacherous becomes picturesque scenery that enhances the romance of carriage travel. Through a city transformed into something from a fairy tale, her destinations, shops that cater to wealthy customers, friends' homes that maintain the same standards of warmth and comfort as her own, cultural venues where winter is acknowledged only in the fashion choices of the audience, create a geography of privilege that overlays the same city where others struggle for survival, but which might as well exist in an entirely different climate, on an entirely different planet. In the gentle flow of protected time, different relationships with winter emerged. The shopping expeditions that fill Lady Margaret's winter days reveal how wealth transforms even the practical necessities of cold weather into opportunities for beauty and display, where the poor patch and repatch the same threadbare garments. She selects from fabrics and designs that treat winter as a season for particular kinds of luxury. Furs that cost more than working families earn in years become accessories that enhance rather than merely provide warmth. Jewelry designed to catch and reflect firelight creates beauty from the very flames that keep cold at bay. The milliners and dressmakers who serve customers like Lady Margaret have developed entire vocabularies of winter elegance that acknowledge the season while transforming its challenges into aesthetic opportunities. Velvet cloaks lined with silk create warmth so luxurious it makes cold weather desirable. Muffs made from exotic furs become fashion statements that happen also to keep hands warm. Boots designed more for beauty than for practical navigation of icy streets reflect a relationship with winter that prioritizes appearance over utility, because utility, basic survival, has never been in question. These shopping expeditions become social events in themselves, opportunities for wealthy women to gather in warm shops, where winter exists only as inspiration for fashion rather than as environmental challenge. The conversations that accompany these shopping trips treat winter weather as backdrop for social theater, something that affects what one wears to be seen, rather than as something that affects whether one survives the season. The rhythm of her social world created its own insulated music. The evening entertainments that define London's wealthy winter social season transform the fog-bound city into a stage set for elaborate performance of comfort and refinement. Dinner parties in houses where every room blazes with warmth, where crystal and silver catch and multiply candlelight, till each gathering seems to take place inside a jewel. Musical where professional performers despite their own struggles with winter travel and cold practice rooms, provide entertainment for audiences wrapped in furs and seated in heated halls. These entertainments acknowledge winter only as it enhances the pleasures of gathering the intimacy that comes from being enclosed together against cold and fog. The particular beauty of warmth shared in groups, when the world outside has become temporarily hostile to comfort. The fog outside drawing room windows becomes romantic atmosphere, the frost on glass becomes decorative etching, the distant sounds of a city struggling with winter weather become atmospheric background music for conversations that need never acknowledge the struggles they accompany. The food served at these gatherings represents winter cuisine as art rather than sustenance, dishes that provide pleasure, and variety rather than simple fuel for bodies that must generate their own heat against constant cold. Hothouse fruits and vegetables that cost fortunes to grow in heated greenhouses, imported delicacies that arrive despite weather, challenges because money can overcome obstacles that stop others, wines and spirits that warm from within, but as pleasure rather than necessity. In the warm silence between entertainments, privilege revealed its particular burdens. Yet even among London's wealthiest residents, winter brings its own forms of constraint and challenge, though these bear little resemblance to the life and death struggles of the poor. The fog that makes travel dangerous for pedestrians makes social calling more difficult even for those who travel by carriage, requiring more planning, more flexibility, more willingness to adapt social schedules to weather patterns that cannot be controlled, regardless of wealth. The shortened days and limited visibility affect even the most luxurious social gatherings, requiring more artificial light, more careful planning of timing, more attention to creating warmth and brightness in spaces that summer's longer days would illuminate naturally. The constant need for coal fires in every room creates demands on household staff that must be managed and coordinated, adding layers of complexity to domestic routines that summer's milder weather eliminates. Some members of London's elite develop what might be called winter melancholy, a response to the season's shortened days, and limited light that cannot be entirely overcome by wealth and comfort. These individuals find that privilege protects them from winter's physical threats, but cannot shield them from its psychological effects. The way persistent fog and cold affect mood and energy regardless of how successfully external comfort addresses external challenges. The gentle melancholy of protected lives revealed its own quiet struggles. Lady Margaret, despite her warm rooms and beautiful possessions, sometimes finds herself standing at fog-wrapped windows with a sense of isolation that has nothing to do with cold or discomfort. The very completeness of her protection from winter's challenges creates a distance from the city's life, a separation from the immediate reality of seasonal change that can feel like living in a beautiful prison where seasons are observed rather than experienced. The fog that she watches from warm drawing rooms sometimes seems to represent mysteries that her comfortable life cannot penetrate, experiences that exist beyond the reach of wealth and privilege, forms of knowledge that can only come from direct encounter with challenge and discomfort. In her most reflective moments, she recognizes that her protection from winter's hardships also protects her from winter's lessons, from the particular forms of strength and community that emerge only under pressure. The charitable work that occupies much of her winter social calendar represents an attempt to bridge this gap, to connect her protected world with the struggles she observes from behind warm glass. Yet she remains aware that her understanding of winter hardship is necessarily limited by her inability to experience it directly. That her sympathy, however genuine, emerges from safety rather than shared struggle. In the rhythm of protected days, different forms of meaning struggle to emerge. The books that occupy Lady Margaret's winter readings selected from libraries, heated to perfect comfort and illuminated by lamps that burn without regard for fuel costs, often focus on adventure and challenge, exotic travels and dangerous explorations that her own life cannot provide. She reads accounts of Arctic expeditions from the safety of rooms heated to tropical warmth, stories of survival and endurance while surrounded by every possible comfort and convenience. These books sometimes inspire a restlessness that her comfortable circumstances cannot satisfy, a longing for experiences that would be incompatible with the life of privilege and protection that defines her existence. The fog outside her windows begins to represent not just weather, but mystery. Not just atmospheric inconvenience, but doorway to forms of experience that her wealth and comfort place beyond her reach. Yet she also recognizes the real beauties and genuine pleasures that her privileged position makes possible. The ways that protection from winter's harshest effects allows for forms of cultivation and refinement that would be impossible under conditions of mere survival. Her warm rooms become spaces for art, music, literature, conversation that create their own forms of value and meaning, their own contributions to the culture and society that emerge from the luxury of safety. The gentle accumulation of protected moments created its own form of significance. As Lady Margaret's winter day draws toward evening, her warm house becomes a beacon of light. And warmth in a fog-bound city, gas lamps, and fireplaces, creating islands of visibility in a sea of gray mystery. The preparations for dinner table settings that gleam with silver and crystal flowers, arranged to catch and reflect candlelight foods that represent the successful transformation of winter ingredients into art, transform the simple act of eating into ceremony, into celebration of human ability to create beauty from necessity. The guests who arrive for dinner have traveled through the same fog-bound streets that challenge London's poor, but in carriages that protect them from cold and discomfort, with destinations that promise warmth and pleasure, rather than the uncertain shelter that others seek. Their conversations acknowledge winter only as it affects their shared social world. The ways weather influences fashion choices, social schedules, and seasonal entertainments, yet occasionally, usually when the fog grows particularly thick and the sounds of the struggling city penetrate even into warm drawing rooms. These conversations touch on awareness of the parallel world existing just outside their heated chambers. A guest might mention glimpsing figures moving through the fog during a carriage journey, might reference newspaper accounts of winter hardships, might suggest additional charitable activities to address problems that remain largely abstract to those discussing them. In the warm light of privileged evening, contrasts became visible. The dinner conversation, as it flows around topics of fashion, politics, literature, and social gossip, occasionally illuminates the strange contradictions of London winter life. How the same fog that creates romantic atmosphere for wealthy dinner parties makes navigation deadly for those without shelter. How the same cold that inspires beautiful winter fashions among the wealthy creates mortal threats for those without adequate clothing or fuel. These contradictions exist mostly at the edges of consciousness for Lady Margaret and her guests. Acknowledged when unavoidable but generally kept peripheral to conversations focused on pleasures and concerns that emerge from comfort rather than survival. The warm dining room, with its gleaming table and beautiful appointments, its skilled service and carefully prepared food, exists as a triumph over winter's challenges, but also as a form of insulation from winter's lessons. As the evening progresses and gas lamps are lit against the fog-dimmed darkness outside, the house becomes increasingly isolated from the city beyond its walls, increasingly enclosed in its own atmosphere of warmth and beauty and cultivated pleasure. The fog outside grows thicker, muffling even the limited sounds that penetrated earlier, creating a sense that the warm house floats in gray space. Disconnected from the geography of struggle and survival that defines winter for most London residents, the gentle isolation of privilege created its own particular form of winter experience. When Lady Margaret retires to her bedroom at evening's end, the contrast between her experience and that of London's winter poor becomes most apparent. Where others huddle under insufficient blankets in rooms barely warmer than the streets outside, she moves through chambers heated to perfect comfort, where fires burn through the night tended by servants whose own cold struggles remain invisible, where thick curtains and heavy bed hangings create cocoons of warmth that make winter seem like a distant rumor. Her nighttime routine unfolds surrounded by luxuries that transform the basic human need for warmth into art. Silk nightgowns that feel like embraces against skin never touched by winter-cold bed warmers, filled with coals from fires that never dim. Covers made from furs and down that create warmth so complete and enveloping that cold becomes not just absent, but unimaginable. As she settles into sleep, the sounds of winter London reach her room filtered through layers of comfort and protection. Distant enough to seem atmospheric rather than threatening, mysterious rather than dangerous. The fog that disorients others becomes white noise that enhances rather than disturbs her rest. The wind that chills others becomes music that accompanies rather than interrupts her dreams. In the deep quiet of protected sleep, different dreams took shape. Lady Margaret's dreams, when they come, sometimes carry her beyond. the warm boundaries of her actual experience into adventures and challenges that her waking life cannot provide. She dreams of fog-bound streets where she must find her way by sound and touch rather than sight, of cold that penetrates clothing and skin, of warmth that must be earned rather than assumed. These dreams provide experiences of winter that her privileged position makes impossible in waking life, temporary escapes from the beautiful prison of complete comfort. But she awakens always to the same warm room, the same perfect temperature, the same invisible service that ensures her comfort without requiring her acknowledgement or understanding of the work that creates it. The winter morning light, when it filters through fog and curtains to reach her bedside, illuminates a world where seasonal change affects fashion and social schedules, but never threatens survival, where winter exists as aesthetic choice rather than environmental challenge. As morning returns to the warm chambers, the cycle prepares to begin again. The breakfast that awaits Lady Margaret, served on fine china beside a fire that burns with steady warmth, represents the successful transformation of winter survival needs into civilized pleasure. Hot foods that provide comfort rather than mere sustenance, warm rooms that encourage lingering over conversation, and newspapers rather than rushing toward. Whatever warmth the day might provide, clothing selected for beauty and fashion rather than for basic protection against mortal cold. As she prepares for another day of winter comfort and pleasure, Lady Margaret exists within a parallel London that shares geography but little else with the city, where others struggle merely to survive the season. Her London consists of warm interiors connected by heated carriages, of social activities that acknowledge winter only as inspiration for particular forms of beauty and entertainment, of concerns and pleasures that emerge from safety rather than from the daily negotiation with threat that defines winter for most urban residents. Yet occasionally, in moments of stillness, beside fog-wrapped windows, she glimpses the other London that exists beyond her warm walls. The city where winter shapes every decision and every dream, where survival itself becomes a form of art practiced by those who have no choice but to master its demands. In these moments, the fog outside seems to represent not just weather, but mystery. Not just atmospheric inconvenience, but the vast, largely unknowable experiences of those for whom winter means something entirely different from what it means to her. In the contrast between warmth and cold, different forms of human experience reveal themselves. As our exploration of privileged winter draws toward its close, we might reflect on how the same city, the same season, the same fog, and cold created such vastly different experiences for residents separated by wealth and social position. Lady Margaret's winter consists of beauty, comfort, and pleasure, interrupted occasionally by awareness of suffering she cannot fully comprehend. The winter we explored in our earlier segments consisted of survival strategies, community cooperation, and endurance that creates its own forms of dignity and meaning. Both experiences are authentically human. Both reveal aspects of how people respond to seasonal challenge and change. The wealthy created elaborate cultural responses to winter that transform survival needs into art, while the poor developed practical responses that transformed necessity into forms of grace and mutual aid. Neither experience invalidates the other, but together they reveal the complex ways that economic circumstances shape not just comfort and survival, but the entire framework through which individuals understand their relationship with the natural world. The warm light fades as our journey through winter's many faces reaches its gentle conclusion. As we step back from our journey through Victorian London's winter, let us pause to feel how far we have traveled. We began in the narrow rooms and frost-touched streets where ordinary Londoners faced each winter day as a quiet battle requiring ingenuity, endurance, and the particular forms of courage that emerge from necessity. We walked with Henry Mayhew through fog-wrapped alleys where voices preserved in his notebooks still whisper stories of adaptation and dignity, discovered in the most challenging circumstances. We drifted through the yellow mystery of London fog itself, that strange collaboration between nature and industry that transformed an entire city into something otherworldly. And finally, we stepped through warm doorways into chambers where wealth transformed winter from survival challenge into backdrop for comfort and beauty. Each of these journeys revealed different aspects of how human beings respond to seasonal change. Different strategies for finding meaning in community when the natural world becomes temporarily hostile to easy comfort. The crossing sweeper, learning to read fog patterns, the mudlark developing winter skills that turn scarcity into opportunity, the laundress creating warmth through shared struggle, the aristocrat finding beauty in atmospheric effects all represent authentic responses to the same. Environmental challenges, different forms of wisdom adapted to different circumstances. The rhythm of all their days, so different, yet so essentially human, creates a symphony of winter survival. Tonight, as you settle into whatever warmth surrounds you, consider how the simple act of staying warm connects you to the long history of human adaptation to seasonal change. The heat that surrounds you as you drift towards sleep represents the successful completion of challenges that once required daily attention, daily skill, daily cooperation with others, facing the same struggles. The fog that once transformed London into mystery has lifted from our modern cities, but it leaves behind lessons about finding community and challenge. Beauty and hardship, grace in the simple act of enduring through difficult seasons, toward the promise of spring's eventual return. The Victorian winter that we have explored together exists now only in memory and imagination, preserved in the notebooks of observers like Mayhew, in the literature and art that captured its particular forms of beauty and struggle, in the archaeological layers of a city that still bears traces of those who learned to survive and even flourish during London's most challenging seasons. Yet the essential human responses to seasonal change, the search for warmth and community, the creation of meaning from necessity, the discovery of beauty in unlikely circumstances continue to shape how we understand our relationship with the natural world and with each other. In the gentle quiet that follows all stories, rest arrives like spring after winter. As the fog lifts from these historical streets and returns them to the realm of memory and dream, as the gas lamps dim and the coal fires bank themselves for the night, we can appreciate how much human experience fits within the simple concept of staying warm through winter. Behind those two words, staying warm, lie centuries of ingenuity, an adaptation, cooperation, and endurance. The daily creation of small miracles that transform survival into art, necessity into grace. Rest now in whatever warmth surrounds you, knowing that it connects you to the great human story of learning to find comfort, beauty, and meaning in a world that challenges us with cold and fog and the endless creativity required to meet each day's needs with dignity and hope. The Victorian winter may have ended, but its lessons about endurance, community, and the particular forms of wisdom that emerge from facing challenges together continue to warm us still like embers from ancient fires that refuse to die completely, that continue to glow softly in the corners of memory, ready to kindle new flames whenever we need to remember how much strength and beauty humans can create even in the depths of the coldest, most fog-wrapped seasons. Sleep well and dream of spring that always follows winter, of warmth that always returns, human kindness that persists through the longest, coldest nights,